So good morning from Sydney and welcome to our third International Symposium on Project Leadership in a Changing World. And we're really delighted to run these, to continue to run these in an online way, to be able to engage not only with our colleagues in Sydney and across Australia, but also colleagues internationally, and to have this conversation about how project leadership is needing to and is changing as a result of the world that we're facing. So let me start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country on which we are based today. So we recognise and pay respects to the elders and communities, past, present and emerging, of the lands that the University of Sydney campuses stand on. For thousands of years, they have shared and exchanged knowledges across innumerable generations for the benefit of all. And just to note that we're on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. So I wanted to start just by saying a little bit about today's agenda. We've got a really packed agenda over the next couple of hours, two and a half hours. And I'm just going to say a few introductory words, and then we will get straight into a panel discussion on projects and energy transitions. I think we're on the wrong slide deck, though. This is not the slide deck that I'm expecting to see. Then we will move into, no, this is the wrong slide deck. Could we change the slide deck, please? So anyway, let me just tell you what's going to happen over the next hour or two while we get ourselves onto the right deck. So the first session is going to be on projects and the energy transition. The second session is going to be on resilience in projects, and then we're going to have a final session that's really a quick fire round of adverts for some of the research that's going on in the University of Sydney and in international universities that we're connected with and that we engage with. Just wait for my colleagues to bring up the right deck. Thank you, Erin. So if you could give me control of the deck. I wanted to start by saying a few words about the John Grill Institute for Project Leadership. So I'm director of the Institute, and picture of John, who's a benefactor of our Institute. And the mission for the Institute is to improve project leadership in Australia and also internationally. So we understand that Australia is part of a wider world, and we want to learn lessons from and also celebrate the things that Australia is doing well in that wider context. Just to note that if you are using social media, then we do have a hashtag for the event, and please do feel free to use that. Please feel free to talk about the general ideas that are being discussed in the sessions, but please do treat it as Chatham House rules. So if you're going to directly quote someone, please do check with them first that they're happy to be quoted. Could you move the slide on, please? Yeah, so I wanted to say that we're celebrating 10 years of the John Grill Institute for Project Leadership this year. And I see our activities as a flywheel that connects research and practice. So we believe in research-informed executive education, and we also believe in working closely with our peers in industry to develop the research agendas and to inform our research. Next slide, please. So this is just research-informed executive education. And can we move on to the next slide? And practice-formed research. And I just wanted to flag for this audience that in our research, we have 3 themes. So we see project leadership as changing in a changing world, and we see it being affected by new forms of technology, new organisational dynamics, and also the need for projects for sustainable, resilient and just futures. Now, in terms of technology, we know there's a particular challenge around digital and digital transformation. And so our first theme is on project models and digital transformation. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this was where I was expecting to have our agenda for today on projects in energy transition, projects for resilience in a changing world, and then the keynotes in brief. So I think we will move a little early straight into our next panel session and create a little bit more time for the discussion for this. So I'm going to chair this panel, and I'm really delighted that we have 3 key speakers to come together to talk to us about this key challenge of projects and the energy transition. That's a huge challenge in Australia, but I know also internationally. And so perhaps if the panel can join me now, and then we will drop the slide and get into a discussion. So thank you so much. Perhaps we can start by going around a round of introductions. So perhaps Chris, Terry, Deanna, we can go round a round of discussions. Just for the audience, if you have questions as we go, then do please put them in the Q&A. And you can also thumb up and kind of prioritize other people's questions as we get into the discussion. So Chris, can I hand to you?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. So Chris Ashton, CEO of Worley. For those of you who don't know, we're a 50,000 plus project delivery organisation in the energy, chemical and resources sectors, and in 47 countries around the world.
Thank you, Terry.
Good morning, all. I'm an electrical engineer, and I've worked in infrastructure for more than 40 years in pretty well all of the major industrial areas, mining and rail, transport, etc. I've been pretty lucky to be involved in some pretty iconic projects over the years. Some, the privatisation of Melbourne Rail, for example, Sydney Harbour Tunnel was another one, and some very large transmission projects, both in Australia and also up in Indonesia. Over the last 8 years, I've been the project director on the WestConnex projects in Sydney, and following the opening of the Stage 3A in January this year, I've joined APA, and I'm heading up I'm General Manager Delivery on large transmission projects. So delighted to be here. Thank you.
Deanna.
Thanks, Jennifer. Pleasure to be here, and really grateful for the opportunity. My name's Deanna D'Alessandro, Professor of Chemistry and also Director of the Net Zero Initiative here at the University of Sydney. Perhaps, Jennifer, just as a couple of words of background to the Net Zero Initiative. So we launched in March of 2022, really recognising that across all of the 8 faculties of the University of Sydney, we had a shared mission, and that was toward a more sustainable future. And so we've come together, around 150 colleagues across the university, with industry, government and community partners to address some of the biggest challenges of our time.
Okay, so to get us into this discussion, Chris, perhaps you could give us a sense of the scale of investment needed and, what that means for delivery in this energy transition. Just give us a bit of background for people who may not be aware of that.
Yeah, so if we look at across the areas which are going to have to be, I guess, a shift in the next sort of 30 or so years, we're currently spending about $1 trillion a year across the energy, chemicals and resource sectors. The projections are, if we're going to hit net zero by 2050, that there's somewhere between $3.5 and $4.5 trillion a year is going to need to be spent if we're going to achieve that goal of net zero by 2050. And we're going to have to see some of that spend shift, or the quantum shift in this decade. If we don't see a shift in the quantum being invested in this decade, then the likelihood of hitting that net zero by 2050 slips out significantly. So it's the pace at which investment has to be made and the scale at which it has to be made. And Terry was talking about earlier about some of the large projects he's worked on. Think about those projects, the Sydney Harbour Tunnel or big transmission projects, and just multiply those by many, many, many fold across complex process industries that are currently carbon intensive, either in the product they manufacture or in the manufacturing of the product. And the challenge we've got is, if you look at the companies that are able to address the challenge, there's few of them now, or fewer of them now compared to what there was just 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. And the world's not producing engineers and project managers at the rate that it's necessary to help deploy the capital at the pace and change. And this is not something we've ever experienced in history. So the challenge is one of scale, it's one of pace, and it's one of complexity.
Thank you. That really gets us started. Terry, can I go to you and ask, how does a country like Australia scale up for the energy transition?
Yeah, look, Chris certainly nailed it about the scale of what's ahead of us. It's unprecedented, and the electrical transmission industry, and I've been part of it for over the many years, has never seen projects of this size before. Years ago when I was doing transmission lines and substations, a $50 million job was a really big job. These jobs now are talking 4 or 5 billion for a res, or even larger. So this particular industry, like the electrical industry, hasn't got the track record of experience, but in the transport sector they do. The transport sector has been doing metros, large rail projects, road tunnels. These are all 3, 4, 5 plus $10 billion type projects, and so there is a lot of expertise in the construction sector, but what we have to do is pivot that expertise in this area. So, taking, people highly experienced in tunneling, for example, and how we're going to do road upgrades. People that might do medium voltage and low voltage type systems, and how do we pivot those guys into 500 kV type substations. So, in my view, there's a long-term training exercise and upskilling required to take that expertise and pivot it in. And there has to be an understanding, I think, from all parties that it doesn't happen overnight. And so all the risk systems, some of the interface management, there's a learning required both on client side, the finance side, the contractor side. And in the supply side, like we're going to go through, we're not the only ones doing this. The whole world's doing this. So, you don't go out and ask for quotes for stuff. You get in a queue and try and convince suppliers to supply you. It's a whole different mindset. So, it can be done, but I think there needs to be a very broad understanding of the broad risk profiles of how it's all going to happen, so we don't end up in contractual nightmares, really.
Terry, before I come back to you to kind of pick up on some of those things, I just want to ask Diana a question about, what roles do universities play here? So obviously there's the next generation, but what roles can a collaboration between research and practice play in supporting this energy transition?
Yeah, without question. And I think that training and education, as Chris was touching on, is one of the most critical one of the most critical things that the higher education sector can contribute. And I know between the John Grill Institute and certainly Net Zero Initiative, we have our eyes focused on micro-credentials. But one of, I guess in terms of research and practice, the sharing of knowledge, that bridging of the gap, if you like, between theory and implementation, making sure that projects, as they're practically implemented, designed, developed, and as we work with our communities to roll them out, that actually there's a best practice there. And so that's something that I think the research sector can help to identify and develop and work closely with the practitioners on, as well as that being able to identify the technologies as well. So, we've got our eyes on what is emerging, what's current, what is fit for purpose right here, right now. Essentially, what's the pipeline of opportunities? And so I think coming in with those eyes and being able to meet halfway with the practitioners as they're deciding, what portfolio of solutions might they be implementing for a particular project is incredibly powerful if we can harness that. Just a couple of other things that I was thinking through was also how do we actually monitor benchmark projects, but also monitor how well they're going. And I think that's another area that researchers can really help practitioners to reflect. We have methodologies for data collection and analysis, and we can actually make sure that we're figuring out what works, what doesn't, so that we don't make the same mistakes and reinvent the wheel. And as Chris and Terry have pointed out, this is an enormous transition of a scale we haven't seen before. We can't afford, we will make mistakes, no question, but we have to learn from those, pivot and move on as effectively as we can. And I think that's another area where research and practitioners can really come together and make sure we accelerate this transition in an effective way.
Yeah, so Terry, maybe I can come back to you on that, and then Chris, I'll bring you in a second. But energy transmission in Australia certainly hasn't seen the major projects that have been in other areas such as transport. What's ahead in the way that the industry can then pivot to deliver?
It's a bit of a new area. To me, what we have to do is we've got workforce in Australia, and we're just not going to be able to import 100% labour that was done back in Snowy, those sort of things. So there's an enormous training requirement of all the players, how we bring them up to scale. If I just give you an example, where I built wind farms more than 20 years ago, we're about 30%, 35% renewable today, and I think the target is to be 82% by 2030. So we've got to do in 6 years what's taken more than 20, 25 years to build. And the added complication is we've also got to add in a heap of firming, because currently the network's firmed by gas and coal, or gas mainly and coal baseload. So that's all going to disappear. So we have to add a whole lot of firming in. And then, as we've said, the whole world's back then, you could have suppliers falling over themselves to offer your equipment. Today, you get in a queue for equipment. So we're going to have to have a really broad understanding to focus on. We want to get to this end game and have it, but I can't have perhaps structures of contracts that were the way they were, or I'm going to have to take people on and understand I'm going to have to train people up. There's a learning curve. Contractors have to they have to allow for a training curve and a learning curve as you do this, and so do the operators and stuff. So it's a sort of a new paradigm of understanding that, you know, a much more collaborative style of working, and how we understand all that without actually getting some experience. So it's like an iterative process. You know, you do a bit, understand what the impact was, come back, refresh. So we need mechanisms to allow all that to happen. And so look, it's a great opportunity. Look, I'm here because it's a once in a lifetime opportunity. So everybody's really excited to be part of it. So we've got the enthusiasm, and you know, it's like a common goal, which is great. We just got to make sure we get, I guess, all the structures aligned to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, can I just encourage the audience to put in some questions in chat, because, you know, I will continue to discuss with the panel members, but it would be nice to have your interaction and input into this conversation. And Chris, I wondered if you could maybe follow up on this question of skills, because you're at the sort of pointy edge of kind of delivering some of this, and, you know, what are the challenges that companies like yours face in terms of, you know, attracting and retaining talent and, you know, engaging in this space?
Well, look, I think, you know, to Terry's point, you know, people are generally excited about the journey these industries need to go on to, you know, deliver a lower carbon future. And that's where we positioned Worley in that space. So we're actually doing pretty well in attracting and retaining. But, you know, we have 4,500 open positions globally. 4,500, and we're just one company. And it's to Terry's point, there's going to be a massive shortage. Now, some of that we're going to be able to address through productivity enhancements as a result of artificial intelligence during the design phase. There's no doubt in my mind, AI or large language models, generative AI, are going to have a huge impact on productivity. And you're going to be able to, you know, have 10 people act as if there were 100 people. So you'll address the volume of people needed in the design phase. But artificial intelligence isn't going to put steel in the ground, isn't going to pour concrete, isn't going to pull cables, isn't going to commission a facility for you. And so the skills shortage, well, we need to, you know, we can bring in more engineers and we enhance productivity through AI. The hard skills, the trades, the electrical, the hard skills that are needed in the field, yeah, we're going to have to really think about training programs and development programs to, in an accelerated way, accelerating people into those areas if we're going to get close to having the volume that's going to be needed. And then it goes to, and I want to emphasize something else that Terry said, the risk profile that has historically existed, or the relationship between the customer and the supplier, is often, most cases in the past, not favored the supplier. Yeah, the customers often try to push risk onto the supply chain. Well, that's going to have to change. We are going to have to go to a much more collaborative, cooperative model that will allow us to focus on delivering the project and aligned on project outcomes, and not end up misaligned because one side of the equation is just trying to protect the downside risk or mitigate the downside. I think in many cases, you know, well, historically, in almost every case, every customer thinks they do things the best way. Their standards are the best, their specifications are the best. And we're going to have to move to a much greater level of standardization and replication in what we do. That means, and you know, really sharing data, sharing knowledge, which isn't something that comes easily. It's not something that comes easily. So a lot of the challenge will be not just in the training of the skills. It'll be working with customers for different commercial models, working with customers to share knowledge across the different projects. We have to bring the community in. So, you know, if you look at transmission lines as an example, the communities through which these transmission lines go don't necessarily benefit from those who in communities or parts of Australia which will benefit from it. So how do you define value differently? How do you bring communities on the journey? So it's a really complex set of challenges we have to face. But you know, we've been working with Princeton University on From Ambition to Reality, which talks about some of the challenges and how to address the challenge. We just last September we released our third paper, joint research paper, talking to the things that Terry mentioned, that I've mentioned, and this is a once in a I'm going to say it's once in a generational opportunity. This is a historical opportunity. I mean, we are reconfiguring the energy system of the world, and that is a great opportunity, yes, but it comes with a massive challenge. But look, it can be done. The human nature, society has a great capacity for overcoming challenges, and this is just one of them.
Chris, it's interesting when you're talking, because what's going through my head is just that this sort of systemic innovation is very difficult, right? Because it's not within the remit of one organisation, but it requires organisations to collaborate, and that kind of industry transformation. I wonder what are the roles for for governments and for other organisations as part of that. Kind of bringing people together to transform a sector.
I think that collaboration, whether it's across government, industry, or academia, I think the role of academia and universities and research is going to be critically important, because if you look at just from a technology point of view, there are technologies that are not yet rolled out that will emerge, that will help us on the journey to deliver net zero. Understanding where those technologies that are being researched, or what research is going on, there different technologies, how we can help work with universities to commercialize technology is going to be really important. So when we talk about collaboration, it's not just customer to supplier, it's universities, it's governments, it's communities. It's collaboration in a way that we've not necessarily seen in the past.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going to pick up on a couple of questions in the chat, and I know someone has asked for your paper, but we can put that into chat or distribute that later. I want to pick up on this question about deadlines. So one of our attendees has asked, will we be able to achieve net zero by the deadline that scientists or governments have set? Deanna, do you want? Oh, go on, Terry.
Well, I think just focus on the first deadline. In APA, I guess the signal that they had the actual goal was a signal for APA, who did start to invest in resources and people, and our companies put on a whole, me included, a whole raft of, I guess, capability in advance of this work coming. And so we've got this end target of 82% by 2030, and they've got some projects announced. And I think, you can meet timelines if you hit deadlines, and that means that, a procurement strategy has to happen on time, and we have to be very agile about how we appoint people for various work. There's more work than people to do the work. So, one of the ways to hit the target is to find a more elegant way to appoint parties for various bits of work. We need best for project, best for taxpayers and power payers, of course. But having three big corporations bidding for 9 months on a job, if you could select the right party in 3 months and free up that team that's doing spending an awful lot of money on a tender, if you like, who can actually be doing work. That makes an enormous difference. I mean, you lose jobs at the first 12 months. Like you get an early start. So I think you can do it. I've seen during the GFC, big contracts let in 7 weeks for the schools revolution, for example. I think if we're really focused on the target, industry can respond, but we need to make sure that we don't waste a lot of time, if you like, at the front end is my signal.
Thanks. I think that's very helpful, and it makes me think that in some senses you're moving from a project to a sort of program level approach in some of that procurement kind of strategy, rather than tactically procuring projects. You want to look at the overall program and the goals. Is that a fair kind of reflection on the thinking?
Well, I think it is. to me, the supply chain lags. The sooner we can get equipment on order, that's one of the big things on your critical path. Clearly, the community is a huge issue, making sure that, where we're going to put all this stuff and how we're going to manage it. But I just feel it's a sort of a cultural shift across everybody, that let's do it unconventionally. Let's do it fast, not the traditional, timelines that the industry's been used to. I mean, that's my signal, or my message, if you like. We can hit targets if we get a shot at getting on with it.
I think Terry, you're right. I mean, we have a saying: 3 bids and a buy. That's not going to work in the future. It is going to have to be a more collaborative, programmatic approach where it's relationship based, and the level of historical mistrust between buyers and suppliers during a bidding process moves to a relationship founded on trust, because there isn't enough companies to address what is going out there if you adopt the traditional 3 bids and a buy process, and that's just a fact. That's just a fact. The time where the buyer had all of the power to make the decisions is gone. If you look at the number of companies who can build what Terry's looking to build in Australia, what we're looking to build, look at how many have gone out of business in the last 3 or 4 years, 5 years. So there's not the capacity. So that means you have to use what capacity exists or what is remaining more efficiently, which goes to Terry's point.
Yeah. So just trying to pick up another question. What are the organisation sector as a whole doing to build the skills pipeline, i.e. building the workforce so you don't have thousands of gaps? For instance, what's being done to work with education systems from a number of countries and apprentices, work-based training, etc. I know there was lots of thinking about this at the recent event I was at, Chris, that Wally organised. But I wonder if people could reflect on, what the sector's thinking about this skills pipeline.
Well, I mean, on the non-trade side, we'll hire probably 800-900 graduates this year globally. Yeah. So really focused on graduate recruitment across the organization. We had in September, the first week in September, we had 250 graduates start on a Monday in our business in India. And then across the year, we've got graduates starting every week. We have apprenticeship programs. We have relationships with technical colleges in different countries around the world, and to help bring on apprentices and put them through a development program. So you've got to have a structured approach to attracting resource, whether it's skilled or yet to be skilled, and then have in place the strategy and the capacity internally to put them through a structured training program. We will link, and we are linking in with colleges. Our relationship with University of Sydney is New South Wales, University of Sydney, Brisbane. In the US, relationship with different colleges and universities, both technical colleges and sort of the universities. They're all going to be important to attract resource in, but also we've got to work with the university to make the industry more attractive, because kids leaving school at 18 and going to university, that we want them to choose engineering or finance or project controls or project management, so they can start thinking about what their post-academic career could look like. And in the energy sector, for the last 2 decades, energy's been a dirty word. People have preferred to go into banking or IT or some other industry. And so, how do we make it more attractive? Well, we make it more attractive by, communicating the opportunity of being part of making a real difference in the world. This problem is going to be solved by engineers and finance people and project managers, and so it's it's really about attracting and then developing. And if you do the right development with people, then it'll help retain them. But you've got to have a structured approach to it at scale.
Yep.
At scale.
I I think if I could just add a comment, Chris is spot on, but yeah, we have to blend to train those guys up. We also have to blend the experience and know-how from, best in the world, which certainly Worley have got footprint right over the world. And yeah, if you focus just back on boots on the ground issue, and yeah, one thing we can't do is take labour from the local industry, right? We can't. Yeah, we can take. We want to create jobs and things, but we can't make sure that the farmers can't get labour to get their crop off, for example. So we're going to have to train up a workforce that's coming from other sectors, the resources and the transport, the big projects. And then we have to blend experience from best in world. So, stringing 500 kV transmission lines, when's the last time we built 500 kV transmission lines in Australia? And these are the biggest, like I've not seen anything like it. So we need to have a very mature conversation around how we blend overseas experience at all levels with our Australian workforce to bring them up the curve. And, that needs to be, we're just going to have a blended construction workforce to get this thing done. And then we can take the best experience from around the world, blend it with our people. And we've got the big positive, that's a big program, contractors love a 10-year program. I can invest. I've got time to invest and get a return. So we start that mature conversation very early about how we bring in, workforce to help assimilate and work with our workforce and get them up the curve. And, we'll get the skills. And we're competing with all the other countries, don't forget. But Australia's a pretty attractive place at the end of the day. People like to come here.
Terry, I want to kind of move us on a little bit just to try and take as many of the questions as we can. There's one here about how we pivot delivery experience of major transport projects where learnings are not shared due to confidentiality, to this sector where sharing is going to be important.
Yeah, well, it's pretty hard to get around the confidentiality agreement, I suppose. I just think, look, my own experience is, I've just done 8 years in large, road infrastructure, and there's people that I've worked with that would, as that comes off, they want to keep working, and that experience is in people's heads. You attract half a dozen very, very good people with knowledge, and then they attract a heap of people, and learn knowledge and experience is not bound by confidentiality, is my view.
Okay.
Yeah, there are certain, software and proprietary packages, of course, but, most suppliers, in my view, want to get a piece of the action in this new industry.
Yeah. So, Chris, you're involved in 47 countries. What are they doing well, and what is it that they're doing? Where is it that Australia should look to learn from, for example?
Look, I think every jurisdiction we work in, the biggest difference is they've all started at different times on this journey. So if you look at Europe, Europe was much further ahead than the US, and the US is probably further ahead than Australia. So the big difference is that there's the point in time when they began the journey toward net zero. And, I think what Australia can learn is, I think it's a balance between, make sure they get the requisite, the journey that the country needs to go on gets the requisite support from the government, but equally allows the customers and allows the supply chain to get on and do it. One of the biggest challenges is environmental permitting. You can take 4 years, 5 years, 6 years to get an environmental permit. We've done projects in Germany after Russia invaded Ukraine. There was a massive shortage of gas, and we designed, built and installed a gas import terminal, LNG regasification terminal in 9 months. That would normally take 30 to 36 months. Now we're able to do it because there was massive collaboration and cooperation across the stakeholders, one of which was working with the government on permitting. So, and I keep coming back to Terry, I mean, the challenge around permitting of transmission lines is an incredible impediment to the expeditious delivery of linear infrastructure. So I think some governments have started early. Others in the US, for example, have got the Inflation Reduction Act, which is putting economic incentive in place. It's hundreds of billions of dollars, and every country has to decide what makes sense for them in their particular jurisdiction. But I think there are lots of things that could be learned, but getting on with it, starting early, supporting industry in deploying the capital is going to be key. And so one of the key things is the permitting. That can take a long time and add an incredible amount of time to the schedule that could otherwise be shortened.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question in the chat around, doing it fast, right? So do these very complex projects that involve so many stakeholders, do they have the time allowed to educate, build trust in the community? And often these projects don't go to time due to the kind of community engagement, the need, so there seem to be two pressures here, right? One is to engage with the communities and kind of discuss what's going to happen, but the other is to do this sort of fast to meet the global targets that we have. And I wonder if this is a comment Marissa's put in the chat. I wonder if there's anything that people want to kind of comment on related to that.
Maybe sorry, Terry.
No, please, Deanna, you go. I've spoken.
I just wanted to add, there are examples of good practice here. There are certainly many examples, I'm sure we're all aware of renewable energy projects that have not gone well, and where the communities have rejected those projects, or indeed, the developers have implemented the technology, but there was not community acceptance. And so as a result, sometimes those technologies lie dormant because they're not actually used in the way that was hoped for. But there are examples of good practice, and we're definitely seeing communities as well taking up the charge, who are grounding and doing their own, for example, electrification of rural and city communities like Thirroul, just south of Sydney, which is part of the Electrify Everything campaign across Australia. So there are examples, they're context dependent. So what works in the States or what works perhaps in India or the UK may not work so well in another community, but where we might pair or sister communities, this is an idea that was shared with me recently that's used in the United States, where they actually have a community who has been through transition or is on that pathway in a particular area, and they bring them together with a community that is just starting its journey and share the learnings. That obviously requires a lot of trust that I think Chris and Terry have touched on, but there may be some mechanisms there that we could actually put in place to help to accelerate this and embed the learnings from one jurisdiction to another that needs them.
Thank you, Diana. So I'm just I'm conscious of time, so I think just seeing if there's another question that I can quickly pick up. I mean, maybe Diana, just sort of back to you in terms of the role of our doctoral students in this, bringing knowledge into this area through around net zero.
Yeah, I think, and Chris, we have a couple of students supported by Worley, working very closely with project management and supported by the Net Zero initiative. So, as much as we can get these students who may be, yes, working on higher degrees, but actually embedded and working on problems that are here and now being faced by our industry, such that the connection point between practice and theory is deeply embedded. And so the feedback loop is narrowed, the gap is narrowed, and those learnings can be passed on in an extremely effective way. Okay, I'm going to just go around the panel and ask you if you want to make a kind of closing comment, and then we will finish and hand on to the next panel. So Chris, do you want to start us off if there's a final thing you want to kind of reflect?
Yeah, look, I'll just say I don't think there's been a more exciting time to be in project delivery. Yeah, the complexity, the scale, and the changing nature of how we're going to have to deploy capital is, I think, more exciting than it's been in many decades. So And it's going to take collaboration across industry, academia, and government to get us to where we need to be.
Thank you. It's a nice note, certainly for our audience with their interests in projects. Terry.
Yeah, look, just building on Chris's comments, it's rare that you get almost a unanimous goal. Like, you know, the community wants net zero. I want net zero. Industry is ready to want to do it. We've got a common purpose. The political, you know, our government wants it. Everybody's on board, and therefore all the ingredients are there to make it happen. And that element of collaboration and, I guess, understanding the risk profiles and acknowledging that we're going to have to gear up over time, and then, yeah, we'll get better as we go, and we'll reap the benefits with the training is you know, it can be done, and it's, you know, it's just generational what we're going to do. It's fantastic.
Diana.
Yeah, I think just to round out on the comments that Chris and Terry have made around research and education contributions, I guess, from the higher education sector. One thing is, as we're, you know, training and working with our students, is to help to really develop that systems level thinking. You know, yes, they will walk into a particular project, but that project, as Chris and Terry have explained, is going to need to be integrated. There's enormous level of collaboration here of a scale that, you know, is different to what has happened in the past. And so that systems level thinking in our students as we grow them and develop them is going to be more important than ever.
Yeah, Diana, just to sort of emphasise that's something very close to my heart, that actually some of these challenges are really enormously complex and require sort of different skill sets of our students and graduates coming out. So thank you so much for making the time to have this panel. I think it's been a really amazing discussion, and it's certainly given us in the John Grill Institute for Project Leadership food for thought in terms of how we, you know, can engage and play a role with yourselves on the energy transition. So I'm just going to close the panel now. So thank you again to our panelists, and I will hand over to Petter Matus, who will chair the next panel. And that's going to be on projects for resilience in a changing world. So Petter, hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Good morning, everyone. My name is Petter Matos. Can you hear me? Yeah, all good. I'm an associate professor in the School of Project Management at the University of Sydney. I'm logging in today from the beautiful Gadigal country. This session is about project leadership and resilience. If you are like me, one of the 10 million of people in Australia who could not use their phone service yesterday, or one of those who were not able to get to work because the meltdown of the communication network also paralyzed the train network, more resilience into our socio-technical systems. We have an absolutely brilliant panelists ready to share their wisdom. Professor, please, in a bit of their work first. So let's start with Paula.
Hi, nice to meet you all. Thanks very much for inviting me. I'm an expert in disaster insurance and protection gaps, and disasters are certainly an issue for Australia at the moment.
Thank you, Paula. Roger?
I'm Roger Swinburne. I've over 25 years of working experience in sustainability and resilience on major projects and infrastructure. So this topic is one that is very close to my heart, and I'm looking forward to our discussion today. I've recently been working with AECOM and ARAP on a number of major projects, but have also had involvement with developing some of the city resilience strategies through the 100 Resilient Cities program, which has actually been a really interesting exercise of broadening the definition of resilience and trying to understand what that means. I've also recently been involved with helping the Infrastructure Australia and Infrastructure New South Wales in developing a number of advisory papers in 2021, which would be worth having a look at if you haven't had a chance yet. It's called A Pathway to Infrastructure Resilience, and it's a series of guidance papers and documents looking at this systems nature of how we deal with the complexity and simplify that for the purposes of project delivery. So I think for me, I do see resilience as very much a systems problem, and I think that reflects back a little bit on what Deanna and Jennifer were just talking about, that systems complexity is actually why we have resilience as a problem. It's because we haven't dealt with that systems complexity traditionally, and now we have a resilience problem because those systems are not necessarily always working best together. Back to Peter's point on Optus. So look, for me, infrastructure and projects need to serve our social, environmental, and economic and financial needs. They need to recognise that there's massive uncertainty in doing that into the future, but also looking at that they're not done in isolation either, that they are being planned as part of an ecosystem or within an urban ecosystem that is incredibly intensively complex, and understanding those interplays in those scenarios is really important. So looking forward to today's discussion, and that's a little on me. Cheers.
Great. Thank you, Roger. And Nader?
Hi, everybody. Nader Paju. I'm a risk and resilience researcher. So happy to discuss.
Okay, thank you, everyone. This is great. And now the participants know who we have here. And I would like to encourage all participants to start using the Q&A function as you have been doing, as you did in the previous session. So it is, you'll find it at the bottom of your Zoom interface, most likely, and submit your questions, or you can bump up other participants' questions to give them higher priority to be tackled during the session. While you are preparing your questions, I will start with a couple of questions that I have prepared myself. First, to Roger. Could you please first get us on the same page by sharing what resilience in projects means to you? And perhaps how do you distinguish it from risk?
Yeah, thanks. I think for me, it's been a really interesting journey. I've worked with a lot of risk specialists over the last couple of years, and I guess looking at it within the context of resilience, and I'm trying to unpack a little bit about what that means, why are they different? Is it just in multi-hazard risk assessment, or is it something bigger and different to that? And that's been a really interesting, I guess, theoretical discussion a little bit. And I think for me, I kind of often go back to dictionaries on this. Like we play with narratives and definitions a lot in our industry, but I kind of just want to go back to the Oxford dictionary. So the Oxford defines risk as a situation involving exposure to danger or threat, whereas resilience is defined as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Now that's just core Oxford definition, but I think it actually says quite a lot around how we think about resilience and how we think about that differently to risk. And I think when we're talking about major projects, it's critical we do think about both, and we understand that they are separate, but need to be considered in parallel, I guess. New South Wales released in 2018, pre-COVID, interestingly, and there's been a lot of discussion on resilience post-COVID, but the pre-COVID discussion is really quite interesting. And they developed a critical infrastructure resilience strategy, which identified from a sort of major projects point of view, you've got infrastructure resilience, which is the resilience planned for, designed, or built into assets, network, and systems. Organisational resilience, which is the resilience of the organisations, personnel, processes supporting the infrastructure to supply a service. And then community resilience, which is actually the resilience of the community in maintaining and building its resilience while contributing to the infrastructure resilience. So it kind of puts it in those three lenses, which I think is a really nice way of looking at it as a problem, because it's not just about the resilience of that piece of infrastructure in isolation. It is about that context and what that brings to the community. In 2021, the World Bank released a resilience rating system. And I like the way they approach it. So they talk about the resilience of the project and the resilience through the project, which I thought was, once again, a really nice way of thinking about what are we talking about when we're talking about resilience. So when we're talking about the asset, it's often taken with a risk lens because we own the risk, we own the responsibility, and we need to deliver on that. But when we're thinking about resilience, it's often beyond the nature of the risk that we face in the project and how we basically identify the likelihood and consequence of that. But that idea of the resilience through the project, I think, is a challenge that we need to take on when we're thinking about major projects. So for me, I think the big feature difference between risk and resilience is, for me, risk I see as owned and resilience is shared. Now, that's a big difference, right? Because owned risk can be costed, priced, managed, coordinated. The shared risk, which is often multi-agency, multi-project, it's a systemic risk. And the issue is that we don't have the governance systems to actually engage with resilience challenges in the same way we do with risk. Risk is much easier because we can own it, we can manage it, we can plan for it, and we can coordinate it. Resilience has a level of complexity to it, which I think we need to see as through a different lens, I guess. But that's my thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I think it ties back to the conclusion of the previous sessions about the importance to understand things at the system level, right? And so you mentioned two types of resilience: resilience through projects, and what was the other one? Resilience
of projects.
Of projects. Okay. Well, that ties next to my next question. Nader, can we build resilience by projects?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I think when we talk about resilience by projects, or if I want to open it in other words, is meaning that we want to enhance resilience of a system, whether, for example, as Roger was saying, it's a community, it's an organization, or it's for example, an infrastructure system. We are dealing with a paradox, and this paradox is very, very interesting paradox. In one hand, we have project as a very efficient form of organizing compared to established organization to deliver resilience, because we have agility, we have the projects are actually a platform to bring different stakeholders, because a lot of time to enhance resilience, you need a collective action. You need to bring different viewpoints together. So from one hand, projects are basically the main means that we are delivering resilience, and this can be delivering resilience in the form of preparedness. You have projects, for example, just a simple shelter building projects in bushfires. It can be resilience through response. So a project in response to a disruption that we would have. We have a lot of projects for recovery. For example, we have a flood and we want to recover from the flood. So we have projects on that context, and also we have adaptation projects, which are very important. We are learning from the disaster, and we try to live with those projects. So from one hand, we have projects as the very effective platform, very effective form of organizing. On the other hand of this paradox, projects have limitations in terms of accountability and governance, because a lot of time when we talk about resilience, we are talking about long-term goals. And a lot of time it is harder to ensure long-term goals through projects. I give you a simple example. You have, for example, two communities, and you invest in resilience building of one community, which is very prone to frequent floods. In that sense, if we are increasing the resilience, we somehow lock them also into a future that probably is not wanted. And if we let the natural course would go through it, probably that community would move from that place. So these are the two sides of a paradox when we are talking about building resilience through projects. From one side, a very effective tool, but from other side, there are limitations to ensure the future resilience goals. And if I want to connect it to the previous discussion, again, the answer here is a system view. How do we embed projects within a set of programs that's within the set of systems, and don't look at one project and goals of one project only.
Thank you. So we have to, I guess, expand beyond what maybe in the old days was seen as the turf of project management, a bit beyond the narrow boundary of a project, right? Okay, Paula, how about money? What's the role of finance in building resilience?
Yeah, so I think that I can pick up on a couple of the things said by both of the previous speakers. But I want to first explain the underlying things that lead to some of this resilience. In particular, I want to talk about the disaster insurance sector. Insurance generally, and particularly disaster insurance, is one of the ways that we have a hidden engine of resilience. So what it is both, so insurance is what's called anticipatory financing. So you put money in place in advance of any potential losses that will pay when a loss occurs to rebuild. So what a lot of the things we know are, for example, highly insured societies tend to bounce back quite quickly, physically and economically, within a year of a major disaster. Highly insured societies can even have a spike in GDP following a disaster because you bring in money to rebuild some of the old technologies, you replace the old with something new. So in that sense, while insurance is the thing we love to hate or just tend to forget about because it sits behind a lot of what we do, it is critical to the resilience we have, particularly in the face of disaster. But there are some increasing problems in that. And so one of those is that insurance is like a global wallet. And if you think about your own wallet, if you've only got to pay for a couple of people out of that wallet or a couple of things, then that wallet's big enough. But when you start getting a lot of disasters around the world, which is what is happening in Australia, we've seen that in Europe, we've seen that in many of the emerging economies, we've seen that in Canada and the US in the last 12 months, over 100 billion just in insured losses in the last 12 months. And so what that means is that wallet is getting too many drains upon it, which means that the cost of capital to keep society insured is rising, which means that actually more and more projects and people, so it's at the individual level, individual homeowners, but also, communities, local governments, even state governments, federal governments are letting more and more assets fall uninsured. That means when the disaster happens, the money's not in place to replace them. Now, part of this speaks a little bit to this problem that I think both Roger and Nadia spoke to. So one is this idea that risk is individually owned. But of course, some of these risks, we assume they're individually owned, that the company, the organization, the individual takes out their contract with the market. But a lot of the things that have made those risks less resilient and therefore less insurable are actually a feature of the systemic changes that we're going through. So there are some questions about whether risk should continue to be individually owned, given that the ability to be resilient to risk is definitely systemic. And then I think the second thing, which is what Nadia referred to, is this long-term nature of a lot of these kinds of things that we enter into. I mean, from a project to just think about your mortgage, it's usually a 25 or 30-year mortgage. So, but insurance is an annual product. So you've invested in a long-term asset, but the insurability of that asset changes from year to year. So some of those long-term assets that we have may not be able to be insured quite rapidly within a couple of years because of the rapidly changing environment and the climate issues. So I'd really encourage us to draw attention to how we ex ante or anticipatory finance our response to disaster. And if some of the systems we've taken for granted are breaking down, what are some of the things that we might do about that? And that is actually something that I've been working on a lot. In fact, we've just released an open access book. If people followed me on LinkedIn, they can get a free copy of that, Disaster Insurance Reimagined, to think about how we deal with this system.
Great. Well, I was listening to this feeling bad because my dwelling is uninsured. Roger, you've been nodding very vigorously during the part about risk and resilience, about perhaps not thinking about risk only as an individualized things or owned by someone. Did you want to say something to that?
Oh, look, I hear Paula, and I know exactly where she's coming from. I think, look, it is a real challenge around what is owned and what is shared, and how I guess insurance deals with the interface, because the compounding risk and the complex risk it's the risk reliance question, right? So one piece of infrastructure relies on another piece of infrastructure, which relies on another piece of infrastructure. If one piece of infrastructure goes down, how does the insurance deal with the compounded nature of that risk and reliance question? It's actually a fundamental problem that we're facing, but I think and who gets left holding the can on that, I think, unfortunately, becomes the taxpayers. That's a whole other story, but I think there's a really challenging interface at the moment that Paula was talking about, and I just wanted to respond and say yes, I know what you're saying there, Paula.
Yeah, that is actually my next question to Paula. So, who should be paying for these risks, right? We have increasing costs of disaster shocks with climate change. It's not going to get better. It's going to get only worse in terms of frequency and magnitude. These costs are quite unevenly distributed. So, who should pay for it? It's a big ethical question, isn't it?
It's an ethical question, and I also think that it's a societal resilience question, because if we choose not to address this, if we simply say individuals can make contracts with markets, and we have chosen to do that, you know, and assume that the market is a good thing that works reasonably well, there's no problem in paying for a social good through a market. I mean, I personally don't have a problem with some social goods being tradable through markets. But when that market doesn't work, and yet those social goods are critical to society, which is what insurance is, but it's not working for the individuals, then is that the individual's responsibility? Should those individuals be simply left out of the loop because something big like a global market, which is changing systemically, is no longer working for them? Is that their problem, or is that actually society's problem? And I would put to you that we all pay when society has a disaster that is not funded by some other sources of capital, because you know, we don't leave people sitting on the side of the road, but those people then can't come to work, those people can't get their kids into school. There's a whole bunch of ramifications that affect all of us. Plus, you know, there is no money tree, so the money that goes to making those people good comes out of the money that we could otherwise spend on healthcare, roads, and infrastructure. So I think we really need to change that dialogue. We've always assumed that if people don't cover themselves for the risk that they bear, then they're sort of morally irresponsible. And that if we subsidize them in any way to do so, that they are a moral hazard because they bring more risk to us as a collective, and that, you know, and that therefore we're all paying for them to freeload. But I think we have to move beyond those kinds of quite old-fashioned ideas. In a systemically changing nature of risk, then people aren't bringing that risk knowingly, deliberately to the community. They're unfortunate. And I do think there's important things also in what Nader said, like we need to be careful that some of the things we do, if we want to prop up this insurance system, aren't actually enabling those people to stay in places that mean that long term they suffer repeated disasters. I mean, we know there are mental health issues with all of that. We know that when their infrastructure is washed out and that food and things can't get to them. So what we really need to do now, and this is the very challenge, and I call it the Holy Grail, how do we actually meaningfully reduce the risk, and over what time scale, in such a way that an insurance market, perhaps a slightly different way of thinking about the insurance market, can continue to work for society? Because at the moment it's definitely not, and it's only going to erode more. So risk reduction, yeah, like you can say, well, the price will come down if you reduce the risk, right? It's gone up because the risk is high. We know that can't happen quickly. I mean, I'm dealing with a group of people certainly on this conference who totally know that even if we injected all the money today to change the risk profile, the effort to actually do that change, the building, the changes in materials and all of that, takes time. We're not going to be able to do it by tomorrow. So what are we going to do to build in that set of steps along the way to keep people financially covered? And I think we really are in the phase of planned migration, you know, so planned migration away from risk areas and building in different ways for the future. So strong appeal to all of you out there who are doing these projects. Let's make sure we're building in the right places with the right materials for a long-term future that we can ensure.
Yeah, well, and then that's the big also topic of climate refugees that we might be getting in even our own country, right? And I see we already have 5 questions from the participants. I would like to encourage 6. Encourage even more, please make it rain. We have a few more prepared questions here, and then we get to yours. Yeah. So the next one goes to Roger again. How do we build community resilience beyond just building more resilient infrastructure?
Yeah, I think it comes back down to that World Bank point of resilience through infrastructure rather than resilience of infrastructure. So I think for me, look, from a community resilience point of view, this is really about communities' expectations, and it comes back a little bit to what Paula was talking about, and that is, well, what is the expectations of the community in relation to who manages their risk reliance, and what does that look like? And then how much do we invest versus how much is it about education, sufficiency, managing expectations, but also how we can build capacity of those communities to bounce back and thrive from shock and stress. There's a whole lot around consultation and engagement with the communities around their expectations and around putting out those, what are the potential shocks and stresses, painting the picture of the scenarios and letting that engagement work through as well. So not treating the community as if they're ill-informed and not engaged in this process. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity as well around embedding traditional ecological knowledge in decision making and actually looking at First Nations and bringing that into play as well. I think there's some really interesting opportunities around community resilience, but also taking that learning and that idea is an important one from the community point of view. I think that, so the community resilience piece is really about how does that community bounce back from the shocks and stresses that are facing that community. And as I said, that's not all on the infrastructure story. That is quite a lot on the community story as well, and those community expectations. I think for me, looking at taking scenario planning as an approach to be able to talk to the community about, okay, this is what we're building out. These are some of the potential shocks and stresses. This might be what happens. How do we adapt that is an important component. I think there's a lot of discussion around taking a place-based approach to things at the moment. It seems to be a bit of an ongoing narrative around projects. And I think the place-based approach kind of brings us to thinking about the multiple complex stakeholders that sit within place, and that what the project or the program does in facilitating and enabling that. I think that it actually forces us to think systemically, which is one of the challenges that we often deal with when we're dealing with projects, which are often very much based on input and output. Whereas if you're talking about a precinct or a place, you're talking about outcomes and impact. And that shift actually allows us to think about resilience and sustainability in a way that we often struggle with at an individual project level. So yeah, community and understanding the community resilience side of things when we're talking about infrastructure resilience is really important. And as I said, I think it's, from a project point of view, it's resilience through the project, not resilience of the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also we can think of projects as sort of response to shocks. Emergency response is a type of temporary organizing that is of interest to project scholars and project practitioners as well. Nader, can you just share a bit of your experience studying emergency response as a type of temporary organizing and how that can build resilience as well?
Definitely. When we focus on emergency responses or crisis response, again, a project is what we are always doing. It is project is a platform to bring different stakeholders on board. And as we see when emergency happens, for example, let's say if there is a fire, for example, in a building in a city, we need police, we need a fire station, we need different organizations to come on board. And this is what we do in different projects in the form of bringing stakeholders, also communities on board. So again, projects are very effective form, and studying emergency responses and crisis responses in the form of a project would help us to understand these emergency responses much better. I just want to focus on two elements of this, and one is people and the other one is knowledge. A lot of time when we have emergency responses, especially in bigger scale, the knowledge is lost because we have a lot of volunteers, for example, coming, and this is something that has been studied in projects extensively. How do we maintain the knowledge and bring the knowledge from the projects to the main organizations and then use it in the next crisis response? So in that sense, again, if we want interaction of projects and resilience, focusing on knowledge management, given the temporary nature of projects, is very important. Second one is people. a lot of time we have people who are working in these projects, and let's say people from one organization go to this crisis response. When they come back to the organization, they might get involved into a different project with different project manager. And that project manager might not acknowledge that, okay, this person have already been involved in that project. So how do we take care of them? The trauma from the previous project, and how do we ensure that they are effectively protected? Because when we are in a long established organization, if we are doing a work, there are mechanisms to ensure that we continue to do that work. And in the sense of individual resilience, this is very important. So I think if you talk about projects in emergency responses, knowledge and people are very important elements to focus on.
Thank you, Nader. Let's move to the questions from the participants. First, it just moved in front of my eyes. First question I wanted to ask is from Jess Henderson-Wilson. How can we integrate best practice resilience into how we plan and deliver current, future, major mega projects, such as those for energy transition? Who would like to take that? It's not an easy one. Maybe I'll just repeat.
I can add a few points. There is a lot of time. This is not the only competing priority when we are developing or planning for a resilience building project. And if you remember, even in the previous panel, Terry mentioned that in a lot of purely energy transition project, we would have competing priority. And a lot of time, these resilience building projects are having a very hard competing priority. So sometimes we say that, for example, we need to limit, for example, agriculture here in this area, which is a main source of income, which is a main source of community building, because we want to increase their resilience. How to do that? There are ways of community engagement and collective decision making, I think, to ensure that the path forward is understood by all the stakeholders, because if it is not, then it is not very long term.
Thank you, Nader. Let's move to a question from Alfin Afan, who was a very good student of mine. How can we measure or assess resilience within projects? That's the first part of the question. And can it be assessed quantitatively? Would someone like to take this first part of the question? Roger.
Yeah, I think there's a challenge with measurement, and I think there's a book that's recently been released on the tyranny of measurement, or the tyranny of metrics, which I think is an interesting one. And I think resilience systems are complex, systems are hard to measure, and actually the oversimplification down to particular point measurement can actually break away from some of the resilience challenge. So actually understanding what of it does need to be measured and to what end, I think is important. I think from the insurance and insurability point of view, actuaries go out there and need everything measured in terms of the quantum of risk. But the resilience question is actually quite a different piece. And I think it is more systemic. And I'm not sure, for me, yeah, there's an element of it that doesn't need to be measured. And I don't want, getting to a point of trying to measure everything in the resilience space could become perverse in trying to manage the resilience challenge. It's probably just more of a quick thought on it rather than an answer to that question. But
yeah, I guess, yeah. Go, Nader.
Just quickly want to add that the first link that I sent there, we have discussions about measuring of resilience on that specifically. For example, sometimes because there is you need to consider not only the whole system, but also multiple levels. And a lot of times these multiple levels are also contradictory. For example, if you ensure resilience of individuals, psychological resilience of project people, we might not necessarily ensure resilience of an organization. And so we have this discussion of multi-layer when you collect the data on these each level indices, and you try to build a resilience index together. What are the nuances that we would face?
Could I just jump in very briefly on this as well? because I think we need to acknowledge that resilience has multiple dimensions, and sometimes some of the dimensions that you might satisfy, like for example, the physical resilience of something may actually not also align with the emotional or social resilience of those experiencing that. So I think we have to accept that resilience can't be a unidimensional measure, and that we'll have to work out how to live with the trade-offs that we might be creating in trying to build physical resilience, even impose physical resilience on systems, which may then destroy issues of community or create emotional responses. So, and I think some of that's actually come up in some of the questions around issues to do with culture and sort of senses of place as well, that we need to be aware that resilience is complex and multidimensional.
Right. Yeah, and then that tackles, I guess, the other question about culture and historical sensitivities. We do not have First Nations representation on this panel, but so I would not dare to speak on First Nations behalf here. But it's really something that there is still a lot of work to be done, and yeah, we need to do better in that sense. There is a second part to the previous question about sort of paradox or tension between the temporary and time-limited nature of projects and their sort of defined scope, and then the largeness and long-termness of resilience. Does anyone want to say anything on that, or we just acknowledge that that's there?
I think, yeah, that's the nature of it. There was some discussion about whether it is a paradox or not, which is an interesting discussion, because Paula would be better to respond to what is paradox and what is not than me. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion to see how we frame this as a paradox.
But I suppose you touched upon it now when you said or when you discussed projects in terms of being the vehicles of resilience, right? So I see them as something that can kick the system in a certain direction, and yeah, it has a beginning and an end, and it is small, but it can tweak a part of the system and something that the whole structure might become more or less resilient, right?
I can give one example of this long-term accountability, and it's a very different example than what we had. For example, in apartment building in Australia, we had a serious issue across the world also, which is, for example, like Grenfell Tower of the world and Mascot and those towers here. And the main issue that we are talking about is those long-term accountability of project. We cannot ensure that the parties involved and deliver this project are long-term accountable to the defects that are coming up. So this might help understanding the paradox.
Let's move to the next question from Mashid.
So I was just gonna touch on something there very quickly. I think for me, managing the future uncertainty is incredibly challenging because it's uncertain, right? But I think for me, coming back to the risk resilience lens, I think for me, resilience is it's got a foundation in threat, and it's got to be quantified. We've got to go through the consequence and likelihood metrics and all of those sorts of things. I think for me, resilience is more threat agnostic. So it doesn't necessarily require that level of understanding of what that is. It's more about how the system bounces back from a shock or a shock or a stress that was implementing that asset. And it doesn't have to necessarily get down to that level of known. And I guess if we kind of think about resilience as sort of unknown, uncharacterized, low probability, but potentially very significant over time, yeah, we don't have to get that level of quantification in the threat matrix. So yeah.
Okay, cool. So to Mashid's question, what strategies and principles from the insurance industry's business model can be adapted and applied to create sustainable income streams and provide enhanced protection for individuals in the business to consumer sector? I think that sounds like a question to Paula.
Wow, that's an easy one then. Thanks for that question. Yeah, look, I honestly do think that this is a problematic area for the business model itself. So if we think about the basis of the business model, there's two aspects of the insurance business model. So one is that you collect the premiums of the many to pay for the losses of the few. So there's this notion of capital reserving from the premiums of the many. The second is, of course, that those premiums are in fact the income stream to insurance companies, which they then, it's not like they just put the money in a bag somewhere and pull it out when we need to pay. They actually then use that to invest. And those investments release returns, and those returns then support the capital reserving. So we're in a pretty complex world at the moment in terms of when you get a declining pool of insureds, you get a declining pool of income stream and revenue for insurance companies. It's a pretty good market at the moment for investments and returns. So you may see them making really quite good profits and quite good returns, even as that business model hasn't kind of come to the logical conclusion. You know, I mean, we know that when something's on a trajectory, at some point it will meet it, but you can go through a sort of false high for a while of good profits, even if you've got a declining consumer base. So I think there are some really sort of interesting things about how do we make this sort of sector more sustainable. There's some interesting stuff going on there, Masood. So trying to work out whether insurers, in fact, should be using their investment portfolio, which they use to build their reserves, their capital reserves. Should they be using that to invest in, for example, resilient infrastructure, sustainable infrastructure? I think we're all a bit confused, and perhaps you on this call can tell me, what is a good investment in sustainable infrastructure? What are the projects that are going to deliver us a sustainable future that we should be putting those investments into? So I think that is a real puzzle for all of us that will help reinvigorate the sustainability of that business model on the asset and investment side. And then I think on the other side of that, we actually probably need to start mutualizing risk a bit more across society. Never popular in a market economy, because I always get comments. Some of you might feel free to make those comments now that, well, isn't that just communism or socialism? I don't know. I think that solidarity can work well in a market economy. Mutualizing risk can work well in a market economy. One way or the other, we all do pay. Mutualization actually came from people who wanted to make economies strong and understood that some people going backwards was bad for the whole economy. So it's really reconfiguring maybe some of the ways that we think about the mutualization of risk to create that income being more sustainable. And then that will have the flow through from the business model to the consumer. We've got to stop asking the consumer to fix the problem. That is a systemic problem.
Sorry, Roger, I see your finger up, but we're out of time. I think it's the best timing to finish a session on the notion about communism and socialism. I don't think
mutualized.
I think we can continue the discussions on the chat box. So.
Yeah, feel free. And so, yeah, we have not resolved all the issues of resilience in Changing World, but we had a good chat. I'm moving on to Julian, who is the next chair for the next panel. And thank you, everyone, for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. That was an excellent session. I really enjoyed that. And I'm sorry the conversation couldn't go on a little longer. But we do have to move on to our next session because we have a lot to cover in our next session. So introducing myself, I'm Dr. Julian Pollack. I am an associate professor at the School of Project Management and in the John Grill Center for Project Leadership. And as I mentioned, we've got a lot of information to cover. We have 6 presentations, each of 10 minutes. So I'm not going to take up any time at the start. I'm instead going to let us leap straight into our first presentation, which is by Dr. Paolo Stracci from the University of Sydney, looking at constructing the Sydney Opera House on a 50-year anniversary. So, Paolo, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Julian. Hi, everyone. Morning, everyone. My name is Paolo Stracci. I'm a senior lecturer in architectural technology at the University of Sydney. And today I'm delighted to share a super quick overview of our 3-year research into the construction of the iconic Sydney Opera House, which is currently, as we all know, if you're in Sydney, celebrating its 50 years anniversary. Slide. Yeah. This research project began in 2020 in collaboration with colleagues from the UNSW and the APFL in Lausanne, with who I embarked on a comprehensive study to understand the Australian contribution made by the Australian general contractor Hornibrook to the design and construction of the famous sail-like roof. We dived into you can come back. Yeah, we dive into an extensive array, a terrific array of archival materials, including over 5,000 newly discovered shop drawings, original technical reports, and weekly site minutes. These documents all together allowed us for the very, very first time to reconstruct the technical, procedural, and organizational challenges that characterize the construction of the Sydney Opera House, a site that can be seen as a very first example of construction complexity, a complexity that arose from the, of course, the non-standard design requirements, and that led to the need for creative and innovative construction solutions that were very, very crucial for producing first and then assembly the many pieces that make up the structure of the Sydney Opera House. Perhaps even more crucially, the sales weren't just a complicated, if you like, intricate structure made up of many, many different pieces and parts that to fit together. But this process somehow showed us that those roofs, to make those roofs required a well-coordinated effort, both intellectually and, of course, professionally. Slide. So our research revealed a super high degree of integration, particularly in the roles and workflows between two critical players, Arup, the structural engineering firm, and Ornibrook, the Australian contractor. And this project may be one of the very first consciously to adopt what we today refer to as integrated design, a practice that resulted in a pioneering use of cost-plus contract in New South Wales. So the cost-plus contract was actually used probably for the very first time for the construction of the Sydney Opera House. Slide. During this research, we also started to trace, how the knowledge transfer from the general contractor expertise and developing different buildings to the Sydney Opera House construction. And in fact, we found somehow that Ornibrook expertise was actually developed in bridge construction, and that the very particular knowledge was eventually transferred in the construction and somehow shaped the construction of the Sydney Opera House. This was especially evident in their past work on the Commonwealth Avenue Bridge in Canberra, which served basically as a prototype for the construction of the Sydney Opera House. Slide. So this was a very brief like introduction to the research. If you are more curious about the research, there will be a public event on the 7th of December at the Museum of Sydney. This presentation is a special part, of course, of the Sydney Opera House 50 years anniversary celebration. And there will be also a panel discussion with Jennifer White, another special guest, and even a virtual reality experience that will take you through the original construction site of the Sydney Opera House. If you're interested, but you can't make it to the event or you are not in Sydney, there is a link available, I think, in the chat with our publications about this research and some simulations for you to explore. Yeah, thank you very much.
Paolo, I've got to applaud you for being so efficient and staying to time. Thank you very much. If everyone is so efficient, we might have a little bit of time for questions at the end, so feel free to put things in the Q&A. At this point, I would like to hand over to our next keynote in brief from Dr. Nida Maddy from Georgia Tech, who will be talking about digital twins in projects. Nida, over to you.
Hi, thank you, Julian. I'm going to talk about the scalability of sort of this digital twin projects and more in terms of the fast and slow dynamics that occur when we deal with these projects. Next slide. So digital twins, in terms of scaling, hold a very significant dimension, because as we work to optimize our digital twin project across various domains, we deal with a change processing that occur at different paces. I'm going to reference Daniel Kahneman's Nobel Prize winning Thinking Fast and Slow, which explores the two primary modes of human cognition, which is system one, which is more of a fast intuitive thinking and automatic thinking, and system two, which is more of a slow, deliberate and analytical thinking. The connection between this theory and digital twins for me is fascinating, because if our digital twins are to mimic the reality in the real world and help us with our decision making. They have to be able to correctly replicate the reality and the different paces of phenomena, that change processes that are happening. So change processes unfold at various paces in the real world, some of them rapid, some of them are slow, some need immediate response, some unfold over time, and the diversity in the pace of change that exists is fundamental in order to characterize those real world systems. For example, if we think about disaster events, urban systems in response to different types of disaster will act differently. If it's an earthquake, it will be very fast. It will be in a matter of seconds. A tornado takes a little longer, tsunami longer, and so on. Drought, it takes a matter of decades to take place, and so is the change processes that happen in our infrastructure. Our urban systems also, just like the disaster events, are subject to normal day-to-day, but also different change processes. For example, a city of infrastructures are interconnected. On one hand, we will witness slow incremental changes like construction of a long-term infrastructure project, or we deal with more of a dynamic, fast fluctuation such as daily traffic that we have to deal with, and consider mobility trends and continuously influence the changes that take place into our models. So our models need to stay updated and responsive to ensure that they capture the essence of both speed and gradual shift and the interplay between the two. Next slide. So I'm going to introduce one of the projects that I'm particularly work on right now. This is for responding to a river infrastructure system, the Chattahoochee River, which is situated in the state of, at the border of state of Georgia and Alabama, about 2 hours from Georgia Tech. And we are working with the government to develop this digital twin of this segment of the river for them that's very significant, and it holds a distinction of being the longest man-made urban whitewater rafting course in the United States. And the river is very popular in terms of recreation, so they don't want to shut it down, but also it's a very complex hydrologically, and it requires careful monitoring and intense it receives intense rainfall events, and water from far away, from up to 150 miles away from a lake upstream, and multiple dams come to this river. So it's very challenging, and it presents a lot of safety concerns. It has some sort of hydrological dynamics that includes frequent flooding events, and it are coming from both scheduled, unscheduled water release from upstream dams, seasonal rainfalls, and the river water level will rise. And as you see in the pictures, in a normal, nice and calm day, there's a walk, river walk next to those islands that you see are out. But then the water level rises up to, if you could see the light posts, they're all submerged under the water, and people are free to cautiously use the water and enjoy it, but it's this they have the risk of multiple cases of inundation and drowning and rescue events. And the event, they also have a temporal constraint in terms of responding, because the event of flooding happens, a limited window exists for execution of a safe evacuation procedure, and usually people are tourists, so they're unaware of the environment. So the time constraint is also presents a challenge for them. Next slide, please. In terms of creating this digital twin, we created the river infrastructure digital twin with the purpose of capturing the interaction of humans with the system. So humans, as they use the water infrastructure, and combine it with real-time insights and hopefully long-term trends that would enable them to comprehensively analyze the whole infrastructure system. And our approach was to address human safety, and the digital twin framework you'll see on the right has 4 segments. The first one was leveraging computer vision techniques to incorporate image processing and object detection. And at its core, we're using this object detection library that will enable precise and real-time localizations of people in the water, whether or not they're on the safe islands in a boat or on a about to be submerged island. And that's based on predictions of water level rise that we'll do in addition, based on the water level sensors that we have placed. And then we have a camera placed at the bridge, looking at that segment of the river to gather camera feed for the data and the digital images that we extract to improve the quality of our detection. And the water level detection will let us know how likely and how fast a water level rise is supposed to happen. And then we would do like a submerging prediction, which the elements of the real-time data will help us identify which islands are likely to be submerged or are at risk, or the people that are being detected are at risk. So it's all about fast processes and fast response at this point, including that the risk of submersion will help us with emergency planning and response with the response team. And lastly, we produce a disaster alert, which will help the rescue team or emergency response team to receive those alerts and sort of create a situation of awareness for them. And it could be relevant to authorities and emergency services and the public for general information and facilitating a timely response and awareness. And next slide. And so this mimics the situation that you'll see that there's a digital twin version of the river up on the right, and this is the camera view of that segment of the river I mentioned. So we're capturing, detecting the humans and their activities, whether it's in the boat or a human is just in the water, and we'll know on the side from the digital twin that whether or not the water level is rising in a dangerous level. So we will capture those and we'll incorporate the alert system. So we will capture both fast dynamics that will help with emergency response during unexpected events, and also sort of like a real-time monitoring and situational awareness. But also this helps with more of a slow dynamics like planning and decision makings, because it gives us an understanding of how humans in general over time interact with the system. What kind of activities do they take place? What times? Where? What are the risky areas, hotspots? And on top of that, it helps with community engagement in the long term and strategic decisions, where we'll engage the community for decisions related to the river and interventions and deliberate processes that are going to be helpful with the community and impact the safe changes that will happen within the infrastructure and at the intersection of human and infrastructure interactions. So in conclusion, it is important to recognize that while the integration of fast and slow in these digital twin projects hold great promise, it's not always that easy. I gave you a brief overview, but there are many capabilities that are ambitious and are not entirely achievable with the technology that we have developed humans up until now. But the digital twin development is ongoing, and significant possibilities are on the horizon, and full realization of those. Some of them include model synthesis and capturing heterogeneous data and frequencies into our model and improving them. Some of them are leveraging online learning or nacasting possibilities and improving our computational models in the different dimensions of temporal and frequency dimensions. And more recently, we are able to use large language models and NLP interfaces to hopefully improve them. And with that, I'll pause, and next slide, you can quickly grab my information and email me if you need to discuss anything or ask any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Neda. That was really interesting. I've certainly got a couple of questions for you, so maybe if we have time at the end, I'd like to follow up. I thought the application of different decision-making styles to responsiveness in digital twins was really interesting. But now I would like to pass over to Dr. Natalie Smith from our John Grill Institute for Project Leadership, who'll be talking about project governance in digital health. Over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Julian. And there's some hard acts to follow, some really interesting research with very practical applications. But I look forward to sharing this with you. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I'll just give you a little bit of context for the research that I did to look at digital transformations and the role of boards and executives in those digital transformations. So I was in the context of Queensland Government rolling out digital health, hundreds of millions of dollars, transforming the whole health system, touching over 60,000 employees, the communities they serve, large complex projects. And in the Queensland context particularly, but it's not unique to Queensland, some long shadows cast by some very poor transformation and digital projects. And we call it the Queensland Health Payroll debacle rather than project, but it's, in case studies of some of the worst projects ever. Was meant to be 40 or $50 million, $1.2 billion was the last count, and still going. So my experience had been in industry, working with Queensland Health, trying to improve their project delivery capability. But increasingly, I was seeing that it didn't matter how good your project management tools, your organisational change methods were, the role of the board and executive were critical. Yet I couldn't see much to guide boards and executives on what they should be doing. And in fact, some of the mantra that we give to boards is noses in, fingers out. So what should boards and executives be doing in these large transformational projects? Next slide, please. So that was my research question. Because I had come from industry and trying to, learn how to be a researcher, I used a form of engaged scholarship and action research. And just quickly, and I think importantly, because of the nature, it was an industry problem. I was in an industry question I was trying to solve. The sample involved data that I was collecting from the field, what we knew from research and literature, but also the experience of the participants and also my own experience. I'm not trying to pretend that didn't exist, but to bring that to the research. Then the research process itself was an iterative process of collecting data, analysing it, and then evaluating it and keeping going around that circle. I had the rare opportunity to follow a digital health transformation, which gave the rare opportunity was being able to compare the role of boards and executives when you had the same transformation, the same technology, the same central project team, the same funders, the same business case, the main difference being the boards and executives, different corporate governance structures in the health services where it was being implemented. Because my background had also involved experience outside health, and I knew that the likes of financial services had been digitally transforming for many years and indeed decades before health, I also consulted and involved other industry and transformation types to see if we could learn from them and apply that to the health context. And you'll see from that table quite a large participant group, just over 136 different transformation projects were part of the data collection. So what did I find? If we could move to the next slide, please. So what I found was that there was a surprising similarity in accounts between successful and unsuccessful projects. And so I was asking board members and mostly CEOs, but also others in the executive team, to compare their role in successful and unsuccessful transformations. And even though I was looking at a very diverse sample, I found surprising similarities in their accounts. And yeah, so there were 4 different groupings of activities that board members and executives were doing in successful transformations. And it was almost the antithesis of those in unsuccessful transformations. And I'll touch on those briefly, but the other surprise to me was that when I asked, one of the last questions is, what would you do differently? Many commented that they realised in retrospect, and some indeed had been able to go faster, that they could have gone faster with their digital transformation. And that was curious because I think, as we've talked about in some of the other discussions today, transformations often or mostly go over the time allocation. And we think change takes longer, the community consultation, etc. And certainly in the health context, that is the case. So this notion of going faster was curious, which led me to conceptualize the notion of transformation friction, and that, which I define to be the forces at play between the existing organisation and the transformation type, and that the role of the board and executives was to pay attention to and be intentional about reducing those transformation frictions. And so just quickly, the 4 areas that for boards and executives to focus on. The first is having a pride-inducing purpose in change. So financial transformation, not very exciting to people. The more you could inspire people, give them pride in what it was that the organisation was transforming to, the better and faster change could go. The second, unifying leadership. So the more aligned your executive team are, the relationship between the board and the executive through to external partners, which I heard reflected in our first presentation this morning. Again, the better and faster change should go. The bigger half for me as a practitioner was realising the inherent paradoxes associated with transformation. So, for example, what needs to stay the same, what needs to change, the resources you've got, the resources you need, the need to fly the plane and fix it at the same time. But then realising there are a number of levers that you have as a board and executive to navigate those paradoxes. And then finally, what we call dialogical adapting, but to do with, I guess you start with pride, but you end up with humility. So a posture of listening beyond what's being presented in the boardroom to what's happening at the front line and adapting course accordingly. So they're the 4 in terms of the contribution and the implications, I guess, for digital health projects and governance. I did find they are higher friction. I think digital's higher friction than a non-digital project, and there are reasons I can explain after for that. And I think the health context is a particularly high friction environment. But I do think using these principles, there are ways of reducing friction. I also think, and we talked in one of the earlier presentations about how research and practitioners can combine. So I think there's also some methodological contributions from this research. But yeah, that's what I wanted to share today, and look forward to your questions, and reach out to me if you'd like to know more. Thanks, Julian.
Oh, thank you, Natalie. I've talked to you about the role of boards in delivery before, and I always enjoy the opportunity. So thank you for going into this in more depth. I always feel like I learn a lot when I get the chance to talk to you about this. I was particularly interested in the movement from pride to humility and the way board members were engaging. I'll follow you up on that at another time. But I would like to move on now to our next presentation, our 4th in our row of 6. This is Professor Žiga Turk from the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia. We'll be talking about AI in Construction 4.0. Žiga, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to briefly put in context what the role of artificial intelligence is in Construction 4.0. Now, Construction 4.0 is a kind of Industry 4.0, and it's an umbrella approach that we in Europe see as the next phase in technological development, in technological revolution. And the essence is not just more digital, more computers, etc., etc. The key principle in Industry 4.0 and in Construction 4.0 is that these 2 worlds, the digital one you see on the left-hand side and the material one that you see on the right-hand side, are not interfaced, are not connected by people. They are connected together automatically. In our kind of 3.0 world, well, we design something and then we go with that design to the construction site. We look at the design and then make changes in the real world. And the other way, of course, around, we observe the real world and then enter a few things about that real world into the computer world. This is supposed to merge. This is supposed to be connected without human interface. And if it is connected without human interface, there are several technologies that are needed to support that. Next slide, please. This includes Internet of People, Internet of Things, platforms, digital twins. We had a great presentation a few minutes ago on that. Robotization, but most importantly, cognitive computing. Simply, there will be too much data to be managed by man-made algorithms. There is a need for machine learning, artificial intelligence, etc. Next slide, please. Problems that require intelligence, actually all problems that require computerized support, can be split into analytic and generative problems. The analytic ones are kind of easier, and we have seen them tackled by both AI and traditional algorithmic programming for a long time. So you have a lot of information, and out of that information, you want to create some analysis. Like you have the structure defined, and you do structural analysis about the stresses, etc., etc. Or you have a building and you compute the building physics. The generative problems have been tougher. Usually, as humans, we're generating new ideas, we're creating new designs. But this is changing, and we have various tools to do that. Next slide. In these generative tasks, again, very much echoing what Neda was saying, there are kind of two ways in which we are approaching them. I would call one intuitive, experiential, and the other one theoretical. Here on the slide, you have Luka Doncic, a famous basketball player. He does not know much about the physics of throwing a ball to the basket, yet he scores. Usually he scores for 3 points. And in a similar way, when ancient masters like Brunelleschi and the others were designing cathedrals, they did not have the science of structural mechanics, yet they have built stuff that is still holding. On the other hand, today we teach students formulas, abstractions, logic, mathematics, and they can do stuff. And both in these two ways, also artificial intelligence works. Next slide, please. This is an example where we are using the what could be called the slow or the abstract or the theoretical approach to using artificial intelligence. Here you see a building that needs some shading system. This shading system can be done in many different ways. There are many parameters how to optimize how much light will get into the building, but also how much sun energy will heat the building up. And you can use a strategy called generate and test. So the computer is generating alternatives, testing them, and you're able to select the best one. We can also deploy modern generative artificial intelligence, like language models, to create kind of first drafts. But then, of course, that kind of intelligence is not good enough, not sufficiently proficient to do a design that would hold in an engineering way. Next slide. A similar approach we are using when designing a structure to house a telescope. This is a collaboration that a PhD student of ours is doing together with University of Liverpool. Again, computers are very good at generating alternatives, analyzing that alternatives, and selecting the best one. But this is not what has been fashionable lately. Fashionable was generative AI that was able to create pictures, that was able to create essays, texts, etc., etc. Next slide. And we are seeing startups that are trying to do that with architecture and engineering. Like you would get an architectural draft of a building, just like you get a draft of some text when you're writing an essay. The problem is that it's much more difficult to design buildings. It's even more difficult to do engineering design of stuff than it is possible to simply, continue some pattern that you have put into ChatGPT. Next slide. But they are very good examples, and I think this will be the future of kind of combining the rational, the symbolic, the theoretical approaches with things that can be done with language models, like this Sophistic partner with us in a couple of EU projects. Sophistic is doing combining text prompts with creating and automatically generating models for computation. Next slide. If one picture I would like to keep you up with to understand the limitations of large language models and ChatGPT and all of that. All these models operate on a kind of symbolic level. They are able to fake with communication, with words and pictures, the tips of the icebergs. Yet, when we humans deal with things, we also have very deep, this is the lower part of the iceberg, we have very deep ideas and theories about things. And we as icebergs float in the real world. None of that is available to the generative AI that is so fashionable today. It operates on the tip of the iceberg level, while us humans have deeper and theoretical insights, and we are embedded in the real world. To close up with the takeaways, next slide. Sorry for that. Construction 4.0 is about connecting the physical and the digital. Humans cannot do it alone. The AI is needed. Engineering is much harder than writing poems, essays, and reports. It's grounded in theoretical knowledge, abstractions, and reductions. The currently fashionable large language-based technology does not have all that. It gives an impression of understanding, while there is nothing below the surface of it. Engineering and architecture will remain largely human-driven. However, sub-processes will be assisted by AI, either by intuitive AI, continuing some patterns that we gave as a prompt, or with generate and test strategy, which is well established. AI will kill jobs, particularly where AI will not be used. But not all jobs, intuition experience is not understanding. Thank you.
Diga, thank you. That was a lot of content covered in a short space of time, and I'm still catching up. But it was fascinating seeing the way that AI is being applied in the design process. So I imagine we will have some questions to cover to explore that further when we come towards the end of this session. Next, I would like to pass to Dr. Lara Motti from the John Grill Institute for Project Leadership. And Lara will be talking about the Sydney Mega Project Ecology. Lara, over to you.
Thanks, Julian. My name's Lara Motti. I work in the Institute with Professor Jennifer White and Ali Ashrangi on this research, as a researcher on this project. I actually have a background in environmental planning, consulting for infrastructure projects. So I bring quite a cross-disciplinary perspective to the research that we do. And I really want to set the scene for you. Cast your mind back to before the pandemic in 2018. This is what Sydney was like. Our infrastructure wasn't coping with our needs and hadn't been for many years. And our population had doubled in the previous 30 years, and it was set to do the same in the next 20. And while there'd been significant federal infrastructure commitment committed to back in the 2000s, it was going to take some significant planning skills to realise the infrastructure that our cities needed. And it was also going to take some significantly big projects with potentially some significantly big impacts. And so the era of the infrastructure mega project began. Next slide, please. So why mega project ecology? So project managers and previous scholarship had tended to focus on the project as the unit of analysis, but project leaders addressing the changing world had the opportunity to look up from the individual project to see a project in context, in ecosystems or ecologies. A mega project is a way of understanding how knowledge is shared between different projects at different scales and social layers. And we wanted to investigate how lessons from previous projects are shared with new mega projects in the ecology, and then to understand the potential for standardization, innovation, and learning across projects in addressing grand challenges. So we've adopted a historical approach, bounding our study to infrastructure mega projects across the last 20 years, and with consideration of the dynamic pipeline of upcoming projects that are set by government. And so far, we've undertaken secondary analysis of publicly available data about those projects. And we've also conducted about 35 semi-structured interviews over the past year. And right now we're in the midst of analysing the data, and we're really starting to see some very exciting findings, which I'm going to share with you now. So looking more closely at that structure of the ecology, we notice there's a lot of people movement between firms and governments and from other cities and from international locations. And we noticed that that movement tended to fill the gaps of knowledge deleted to deliver these complex mega projects. Our participants identified both informal and formal practices for sharing lessons, and many of our participants said that informal activities are more effective for sharing and receiving knowledge, such as the activities of Engineers Australia, like professional associations that bring people together at networking events and seminars. And this, many participants said, felt was because these informal opportunities allowed them to share more openly without contractual pressures or risks. Now, between governments, there seemed to be a transparency and openness and willingness to share across borders in terms of leadership or procurement models, or to address a specific task or a specific issue like health and safety on construction sites during the COVID pandemic. Now, within international firms and organisations or construction firms, consultancies, we saw significant efforts to share lessons internally through project handover, startup meetings, peer-to-peer mentoring, project databases throughout the project lifecycle. And what these initial findings are starting to tell us is about relational and physical organisational space for collaborative practices and how that they're formed, and how projects are interrelated between projects, firms, ties, localities, and the crucial role of time in this formation. Next slide. So what does that mean for practice, and what is our data telling us about recommendations for industry and government? Well, associated with this big planned pipeline of infrastructure in our cities, we've seen this real growth in the complexity and size of projects in Australia. And of course, the need to upskill quickly across all sectors, which we've been talking about today, so particularly in the energy and transport sectors. And organisations of Infrastructure Australia and Infrastructure New South Wales have already started looking holistically across projects to understand how to address these market challenges with resources and supplies. So some of our initial thoughts coming out of the research for industry is that we need to think differently about capturing and sharing lessons out of projects and between projects. And we recognise this is really difficult, but increasingly important given the scale and the speed of development in Australia, and the need to contribute positively to outcomes like we've been discussing: net zero, climate change, wellbeing, and productivity. And to achieve these outcomes, we really need to measure the right things. So removing the emphasis on low cost as a competitive factor in the procurement process, and focusing on what's important to communities and values and outcomes to society. We also need to support our community of project leaders in managing these projects. Look, there needs to be a shift to a systems leadership mindset to see projects in a wider context, and then upskilling to understand when, how much to collaboration is needed. So, echoing our research is echoing many of the fantastic speakers today, and we really see these three emerging insights as essential reforms for delivering infrastructure projects in the future. Thank you.
Lara, thank you very much. That was really interesting. I found it fascinating that knowledge transfer was happening more effectively through informal networking than through contractually mandated means, or through what I imagine is the much slower transfer of individuals from project to project, which is probably more of a ecological generational question rather than something that can benefit a project while it's up and running. But thank you very much for your talk. I'd like to move on to our final presentation for this set of 6. I'd like to introduce Professor Jeffrey Shen from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, who will be looking at sustainability in major projects. Jeffrey, over to you.
Thank you, Julian. Good morning, everyone. I'm calling from Hong Kong, so this is 8 o'clock in the morning. Now, I'd like to start by thanking Professor Jennifer White for her kind invitation to join this forum. As some of you know, my research interest has been stakeholder analysis, stakeholder management, etc. And a few years ago, we got the opportunity to look into this issue of cross-regional cooperation in the construction industry. And we became fascinated about the challenges and opportunities in this area. So this is what I'm going to share with you today. Next, please. Let me give you a brief introduction to this concept of the Greater Bay Area. Now, the Bay Area we refer to is the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area. It covers Hong Kong, Macau, and other 9 cities in Guangdong province. Altogether, it covers an area of 56,000 square kilometers and population 86 million. And the GDP in this area is about almost $2 trillion US. The GBA plays a significant role in the national development and regional integration. The map on the right shows all these different cities in this Greater Bay Area. Next, please. In the construction industry, as we all know, construction industry played a very important role in the national development. And there are additional challenges and complexities in this cross-regional collaboration. So the context here is we have 1 country, 2 systems, and 3 jurisdictions. So on top of all these complexities in the construction industry, all these different cities, different regions, have their own policies, regulations, design standards and code, etc. And as a result, although the market is interconnected, but there are still restrictions in terms of resources flow. For example, whether the talents in Hong Kong can work in other cities in this Greater Bay Area and vice versa. So because of this complex nature, the original complex, multi-layered, self-organized, and polycentric nature of project cooperation become more complex. So it is essential to formulate a policy framework for these cross-regional cooperation strategies in the construction industry, in the GBA area, to capitalize on the diverse strengths of each region and enhance the cooperative mechanisms and systems. Next, please. So after we have conducted literature review, we have identified 3 specific areas for cooperation, namely talents. I mentioned early on whether the construction professionals or construction enterprises in one place can work in other places. So this is talents, and also the project management cooperation. There are different project management mode, approaches, and whether these different approaches can be shared in other places to get a real benefit. And the regulations, there are different regulations, design standard, etc. So how do we enable the cooperation in this regard? And of these different areas mentioned or heavily emphasized in the 14th five-year plan of the National Economic Social Development, in the outline development plan, etc., etc. Next, please. About 4 years ago, we got the opportunity to work on this Shenzhen Hong Kong cooperation in the construction sector. and innovation on institutions and mechanisms. We were approached by the Shanghai Authority in Shenzhen. This is one of the cities in the Greater Bay Area. So when they approach us, they look into specifically between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, in particular in the Shanghai area, which is one of the area earmarked for special experiment of new ideas, innovative solutions, etc. So we have approached different stakeholders in the two cities, including the government, the professional institutions, and many other key players through interviews, focus group meetings, and case studies, etc. So among other deliverables and findings of the project, one thing we feel very proud of is we come out with a policy in two areas. One is, as you can see here, methods for the administration of the filing of construction professionals. And the other one is methods for the administration of the filing of professional institutions. So basically, these two documents, as you can see on the top right-hand side in Chinese, which actually opened the door for Hong Kong's construction professionals and professional institutions to go across the border to work in Shenzhen. And this particular policy, of course, it has gone through a lot of revisions, etc. It actually enabled so far 51 professional organizations and 470 professional individuals to work in the Shanghai Authority in Shenzhen across the border from Hong Kong. And also we have, in this project, we have also introduced other possible area for deepening the collaboration in terms of improvement of, and optimization of construction project, approval and supervision systems. For example, one thing we have in Hong Kong is called the authorized person, and whether this particular mechanism can be introduced to Shenzhen and other cities in the Greater Bay Area. And other things like Hong Kong's standard, whether it can be adopted in some pilot project in Shenzhen and in other cities. In the lower left bottom, you can see this is one of the focus group meetings we have conducted with about 40 different stakeholders in the government, in the professional institutions, etc. And we also won the RICS Research Award of the Year last year because of this project. Next, please. Now, as a result of this project for Shanghai Authority, we are now moving to the next stage. We try to look into maybe a bigger scale of the project, to look into whether we can design and optimize a policy framework for the cross-regional collaboration. And it involves the three areas I mentioned earlier: talent cooperation, project management cooperation, and regulation cooperation. So we are very much looking forward to collaborate with some of you if you are also interested in this cross-regional or cross-border collaboration, whether you are in Europe or whether you are in Australia, New Zealand. There may be similar issues. Okay, so next, please. This is my contact. Looking forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thank you for a fascinating presentation. That was really interesting. Jeffrey, if I'd like to ask you a question, or first, if I can congratulate you first on your RICS award. The achievement of creating measures for the administration of filing of construction professionals and professional institutions seems like a major achievement. Can you talk through some of the complexities in getting to these documents that people were happy to walk away with?
Right. Thank you so much. Now, it's a long story. Okay. Now, although Hong Kong and Shenzhen is very close, just separated by one river, you can go from one city to another city within just, a few minutes, a couple of minutes. But because of the complexity I mentioned early on, this is one country, two systems, and three different jurisdictions. So historically, there are restrictions for Hong Kong construction professionals, just to use this as an example, to work in Shenzhen. So one thing we have done, if you allow the construction professionals and the professional institution to work in Shenzhen, because they are qualification requirements, so you have to do a lot of matching. Say, what is your qualification in Hong Kong? What kind of project you are allowed to do? And then we can match the qualification requirement in mainland China, then to see, okay, these two are equivalent. So what you can do here, you can do there. And similarly, like the professional individuals, like architects, engineers, surveyors, etc. So they are different qualification systems. So what you can possibly do here, how you can actually work in the similar area in another city. So this is very tedious work, and it involves a huge amount of comparative studies, and also involve legislation. So you have to go through the People's Congress in Shenzhen city to pass the bill. So it is we have spent a lot of time on this project. There are a lot of tears, but also joys as well. Yeah.
Sorry, I'll unmute myself. Thank you very much. And Ziga, could I pass one question to you in the final minutes that we have? The questions that you're raising of analytic versus generative AI, I thought were particularly fascinating. I was wondering, and also the point that you raised about the different requirements for use of AI in art or poetry versus something like engineering design. To what extent do you think there is a fundamental difference in these application areas compared to it being a matter of how the amount that AI has been applied to these different areas? So for instance, language generation models have been a popular area of application for AI, largely motivated by things like the desire to pass the Turing test. Could you respond to that point?
Yeah, what we have seen from the AI and what is somehow the essence of it is at least the neural network approach, which somehow is steamrolling over all the other technologies, is it's actually very good at recognizing patterns, which is easy, which is the analytical part. And what it became good at in the last couple of years is continuing patterns. So you write a prompt and it's able to continue that pattern. It's able to generate on top of that. And we have seen, or what we are seeing, is solutions that give you like one answer, right? They give you a paragraph of text or something similar. Then you have to come in, ask it some more, ask it some more. So it's unable to work like engineers and architects work, doing loops, testing it again, retrying, tracing back, going back, and so on and so forth. And that's why I think that we will be seeing a lot of the use of this type of AI to get us some initial prompts, to get us some initial ideas. But then the engineer will have to do and control all these iterative steps through which our work goes. So I was showing you that shading system. AI is very good at creating kind of, first idea, which may or may not work, which is difficult to create in a structured way. But then you translate that into a structured definition, into symbolic definition, into a computable model, and then you generate and test those models to go further. So this is, I think, where if you are writing a report and you need a paragraph of literature study, it works very well because it spits it out. But when we design engineering stuff, we do something, we go back, we do loops, we do iterations, we structure it hierarchically, etc., etc. And it will be sometime when AI will be, it will pass sometime. I think theoretically it seems very incapable of doing that. It seems very capable of able to simulate that, to give an impression that it understands. But yet it is kind of void in the inside. So
we don't have long, but I would like to raise a question for Lara. So to what extent do you think there are opportunities to formalize the project management, the mega project ecology? Are there ways that we can more effectively share expertise, share capability, and develop our I guess, societal capability more effectively?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question, and that's, I suppose, where we hope to get to at the end of this, because they're definitely, it was a very polarizing topic. When people would ask you, they would either say, oh, it doesn't happen at all, we don't share anything, or, they would explore some of these ideas. I think it would be really nice to kind of capture in a more formal way some of the lessons coming out of these projects that are finishing up, like the Crossrail Learning Legacy. Who funds these kind of activities is always a tricky thing, but I really think that we don't want to lose that knowledge, and that knowledge is living in a lot of people at the moment. And hopefully, if it is kind of put in a more kind of formalized way like that it could be used in energy sector projects, for example, which is the next obviously big thing that we've been talking about this morning. And I think we do a really great job of sharing technical knowledge, like the learned societies, this technical knowledge seems to happen at that level, but maybe not so much about leadership at that higher level. So that's something that we need to kind of think about within maybe some of these organizations, consulting firms, construction, and within government, how we might capture that kind of knowledge as well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And cycling back to our first presenter, Paolo, if there were one or two key points that we can take away from the Opera House experience, what would they be? Sorry, you're muted.
Yes, I'm muted. Yeah, the Opera House is kind of paradigmatic in this sense, because it really shows us, that, we need knowledge, we need people that have some will to build as well, things, something like that, complex stuff, complex projects, and also, of course, the degree of integration is that was developed for that project was extremely deep and complex, and it relies on a lot of individuals, but at the same time also relies on the knowledge that was developed somehow in building the infrastructures for Australia, so bridges, and then knowledge was eventually transferred into the construction of the Sydney Opera House. Without that knowledge, we wouldn't have been able to build the Sydney Opera House. So it's important to build this kind of, bottom-up even approach, where you start building and then you develop knowledge, and then knowledge become more and more complex and more defined. And eventually, if you're able to somehow, collect the knowledge and to share the knowledge, eventually we might also improve the AI, product, which I think is really hindered by the fact that we don't have enough knowledge in the space yet. But I think when we're gonna have knowledge, bulk of knowledge, but it also showed us that it was, I mean, the fact that we were able to collect, to tell this story now was based on our like access to the archive, to the material that is very difficult to access in the construction space. So I think this is also another lesson. We need access to that material if we want to start, you know, building that collection and bulk of knowledge that can help us to develop and to build more intelligently, if you like. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that's really interesting, because it is the access to knowledge which forms the basis for a lot of our analytic and generative AI systems, but is also the fundamental basis for the interpersonal knowledge transfer, both of which I think are key themes which have been coming through in this set of 6 excellent presentations. So I'd like to thank our 6 presenters, Paolo, Neda, Natalie, Ziga, Lara, and Jeffrey. I wish we could have had more time to talk, but sometimes short and sweet is very effective as well. And at this point, I will hand over to Professor Jennifer White for some closing remarks on our first session of our symposium. Jennifer, over to you.
Thank you, Julian, and what a whirlwind of ideas. And really what I was taking out of that was a lot of people from various perspectives talking about you know, the complexity and the regions and the industrial context in which projects are situated. So, I mean, it falls to me to say thank you. We have a second session of this symposium that's next week, Thursday, the 16th of November, between 7 and 9 p.m. Just a couple of closing remarks from me. So we have a call for papers for the academics on the line around project leadership in a changing world, and I think one of my colleagues will put that into chat. We also have some continuing positions in the School of Project Management. And so for people who are looking to move into faculty or who are looking to move, then we have a capability around project management and School of Project Management, and we're recruiting. I'm also recruiting for a research associate in project leadership in the Institute. So please come and join us, be part of the movement around project leadership in a changing world. And so thank you so much for joining us. And we do have another slide which has our social media around ways to continue to be engaged through our mailing list. And then really finally, it just falls to me to say thank you. No, thank you to the people behind the scenes. And I know there are a lot of people in the office here, Aaron and Christian and colleagues who've been running around making things work behind the scenes today. But thank you also for all of the panel members, chairs, presenters, and to yourselves as the audience for your fantastic questions. And I think people will follow up asynchronously on some of the conversations that's been generated. So thank you, and see you on Thursday the 16th.